Hello there. My name is David Austin Nakamoto, and today I'll be talking you through this presentation titled Sightseeing for Beginners. This presentation will help you teach young students how to sightsee. The article I'll be referencing is Teach or Learn Sightseeing for Beginners by Peter Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham is the choir director of James Madison High School in San Antonio. He sings lead with the Academy, the Southern Stride, the Standard, and the Marksman ensembles. A few materials that you'll need are copies of music scales, copies of solfege hand charts, a metronome if you choose. This is more of a preference more than a necessity. And finally, a tuner. Now, the tuner that I recommend is called the Tonal Energy app. You can get this app on your phone or tablet if you have a tablet. This app is available for both Android and Apple users. And what I love about this app is that it is so much more than just a tuner. Not only is it a tuner, but it is also a metronome, should you choose to use one. And it is also able to produce sounds. That way your students can hear what the sounds and notes sound like if you do not have access to either a keyboard or a piano. A few visual images. The one on top is how the solfege syllables are ordered from low to high and then going back down from high to low, starting on a low do and then going all the way up to a high do and then vice versa. The lower visual image is the solfege syllables with their corresponding hand signs. Now these hand signs are crucial for sightseeing because it will help the students know which note in the scale they are singing when it is time to sing that note. Our teak/learning objectives, a couple music teaks along with one reading teak. Our music teaks are foundation music literacy. The student describes and analyzes musical sound. The student is expected to use music symbols, terminology referring to major components such as melody, rhythm, tempo to describe music after listening to an example. Critical evaluation and response. The student listens to, responds to, and evaluates musical performance. The student is expected to recognize known rhythmic and melodic elements and oral examples using appropriate vocabulary. Now this hits it right on the nail because whenever we are sightseeing, the student is able to locate, identify what note and what pitch it is, and to be able to use the appropriate vocabulary or our solfege syllables along with our hand signs to be able to sing and sign the note correctly. And last, now we'll talk about our reading teak. Our reading teak is developing and sustaining foundational language skills, listening, speaking, discussion, and thinking, oral language. The student develops oral language through listening, speaking, and discussion. The student is expected to listen actively to what is going on, whether someone is speaking or listening to music, and be able to have a discussion afterwards, discussing what they listen to. Now this is great because we'll do a few activities together as a class where we'll sing a few melodic lines, and then we will talk about what those melodic lines consist of. Next, I'll be talking about a few differentiation strategies. Now I have a couple strategies listed for students who are challenged by a topic, students who really don't understand the entirety of sightseeing, or I have a couple strategies for students who are really understanding how sightseeing works and are ready for that next step. I'll first talk about my challenge students. Now, the first strategy that I would find is to employ them with to help them to use games and puzzles. I would use games and puzzles from the full voice teaching method, which is endorsed by the Royal Conservatory of Music. My second strategy to help a challenge student would be to use scaffolding. Now, I would first identify what that child understands, what that student has down, and then from that point on, add bits and pieces to the more challenging parts that he finds a bit challenging until he really grasps the idea as a whole. Moving on to my advanced students, the first advanced strategy that I would use is to invite that student to be my assistant during this process. Not only does it help me teach the rest of the students, but my students will benefit from watching one of their peers. And it helps my advanced student so that way he is really reinforced by this topic. My second advanced strategy would be to provide an advanced activity for that student, give them something to challenge them to see how well they do. And this will help me gauge where the student's at. That way I can keep that student engaged and prevent them from becoming disengaged. Moving on from the differentiation strategies, I will then kind of begin my lesson by explaining what solfege is exactly and how it's going to help my students be able to read music. To kind of supplement that, I would use a storybook that I created from storyjumper.com. I created this story jumper to kind of help further explain what solfege is, and it also has pictures of each solfege syllable with their corresponding hand sign. After that, I will skim through the article that I mentioned earlier. I wouldn't necessarily read it because that would kind of be overload for the students and would disengage them. So I would just skim through that. And then finally, I would finish this portion by doing an exercise where I would physically demonstrate the solfege hand signs by saying the solfege syllables and then having the students respond back to me by doing the same thing. We would go up a scale, up and down a scale. To kind of further explore what solfege is, I provided a link to a YouTube video. This YouTube video is great because it really just dives deep on what each solfege syllable is and how to remember it. Moving forward, I would then talk to my students about identifying the letters of the alphabet that are used in solfege. Of the 26 letters of the alphabet, only 7 are used, and each of those letters has a corresponding sound that goes with each letter. After that, I will start by talking about how to find do and explain how do is pronounced as if they were saying the word do. We start off by finding do because do is the foundation and reference for the rest of the notes and pitches in a given scale. Finding do will also tell us what key we will be sight singing in. I would then play the note on either my app or a keyboard if I have access to one, so that way the students can familiarize themselves with how that note sounds like. I would take this further by having them sing in a comfortable range so that they can internalize what that pitch feels like on the inside. Using that as a reference, I would then play different pitches, adding mi and sol in that given scale, and then repeating that process, letting the students learn what it feels and sounds like by singing and or listening. After we kind of established that, I'd hand out a short melody line that we can sight read and read together and sing as a class. Now, the last thing I'd like to mention is that do is not one single note. Do moves around. Do can be, let's say, a C, for example, or in a different scale, it could be an F. We always want to identify what do is because do is not the same note. We would rinse and repeat by playing do, listening to it, singing do, so that we can internalize it, and then singing mi and sol to create that tonic triad. A few visual images. The one on the left kind of starts off by which we would start off the first 3 notes in a scale, do, re, mi. And then the second image really solidifies what I was talking about a little earlier, that in this scale, a C scale, do is on the bottom and on the top. Do moves sometimes, meaning that do is not just this one singular note. When do changes, we also have to figure out what the name of the scale is, whether that is a C scale or an F scale. Now the next few slides have a couple pictures of activities that your students can either do together or separately as in separate groups or on their own. One activity that is not mentioned here on the slides is that I could divide the class into smaller groups and assign each group another melody line for them to work on. In each group, I will assign each student a certain solfege syllable and note. One student can be do, another mi, another sol, and so on. And then reading through this passage, an example like this one on this current slide, one student can only sing do. If do was the key of C, they'd only sing C, and so on. One student singing each syllable. And then afterwards we would switch. Now the student that was singing do now sings me, or now the student singing me sings do, and so on and so forth. Now here are a few more pictures of activities that these students can work on. The one on the top left starts off by showing hand signs, and the student has to identify which solfege syllable correlates to which hand sign that is. And then further down on that page gives us the solfege syllable, and then the student must sign those syllables without actually singing it. Moving on to the top right, the activity requires the students to sing and sign that solfege syllable while staying on the same note. This really helps because some students might move around on the scale but sing the same syllable. We really want to reinforce that one note in a scale is the same hand sign and syllable. And then moving on further on that page, moving up using different hand signs and syllables. And the last activity on the bottom kind of reinforces that, having the students write out what hand sign is being showed by using the solfege syllable. Finally, after everything is taught and all the activities have been completed, I would then use this quiz that I created using quizzes.com to evaluate my students on what they have learned. This quiz has 8 questions and is great because it kind of helps the students reinforce what they have learned by using true or false questions. That way they really have to remember and think back to what was taught. And that is it for the presentation. Thank you so much.